Greetings, dear people. I am Ian Mackenzie, and I am one of the co-stewards of the School of Mythopoetics, which is a new project that we are launching officially June 1st of this year, in just under a month now. And part of our approach to this big opening with the school is to offer a series of free events to all of you to give you a sense of what goes on within the school and what kind of conversations, what kind of inquiries around this lens, this practice of mythopoetics, which is something we'll get into very soon. Last Friday, if you recall, if you've been in this series of events, I had a conversation with John Wolfstone, also one of the co-stewards here on the school, and we discussed the function and the understanding the role of reclaiming initiation, rites of passage in modern times. You can see that whole recording within or on YouTube as well as Facebook if you want to go back and check it out, as well as on the School of Mythopoetics website, schoolofmythopoetics.com/events. Today, though, I am very excited to share with you this beautiful event with one of Europe's leading storytellers, Jan Blake, who I'll say a bit about before I welcome Jan on. One of the things I also want to name too at this moment before we begin is as we lead up to the event or to the opening of the school, we do have a special founding member rate for you to enroll in the school. And again, if this calls to you, throughout what we do here today or any of these events leading up, there's 5 before the June 1st launch, then please check it out, schoolofmythopoetics.com, and join us as a founding member, because this is just the beginning of a really exciting journey. And for now, here, I'm pleased to welcome Jan Blake to the stage.
Hey. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing good, Jen. And I'd love to share a little bit more with our audience, a little of you, and hopefully some of them have heard of you before, maybe seen you before in some of the other events we've done. But here's a little bit that I'd love to say about you. Jan was born in Manchester, Jamaican parentage, and specializes in stories from Africa, the Caribbean, and Arabia. She has a well-earned reputation for dynamic and generous storytelling, and countless awards and accolades that would properly take 20 minutes to properly list out. In 2021, she opened her own storytelling company in school, the Akuya Storytelling Project, which aims to help folks find and develop their own authentic storytelling voice. And previously, Jan and I had the great pleasure of being in conversation for an episode of my podcast, The Mythic Masculine, as well as she was a featured storyteller in the first edition of A Gathering of Stories on the theme of the soul of masculinity. Welcome once again, Jan.
Thanks for having me, Ian. I'm honored to be asked back.
Well, I want to leave plenty of time for storytelling, because that's certainly the beauty of what you're here to offer. And I thought it'd be neat. We were chatting a bit off stage just prior to first unpack a little bit of what we actually mean when we say mythopoetics, because I in some ways, of course, we're using it for the school now, the School of Mythopoetics, and it's something that certainly I feel I've been steeped in some ways, and at the same time, it's not necessarily well known. And yeah, I was surprised to hear as well maybe you could speak of some of your initial associations or understandings of that word.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it's never really been on my radar. And then it was Tad Hargrave, Martin Shaw, who it's your voices really that kind of rumble in the background when I think of mythopoetics, but I don't know enough about it. So I just kind of associate it with lovely bearded men and leave it there, really. So I'm waiting for you to tell me what it is so I can learn more.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I will say for sure that my understanding of the term mythopoetics was, I believe initially coined as mythopoeia, if I'm saying that right. That Tolkien, J.R.R. Tolkien of Lord of the Rings fame actually coined, which I understand was around the practice of, I suppose in literature, is generating mythology or mythos, right? And of course, Lord of the Rings is such a clear example of a very rich and detailed mythos, right? That continues to be extremely popular to this day. But that word shifted around, I suppose, the time of Bly and Michael Meade, and really became to characterize what was known as the mythopoetic men's movement.
Right.
And I've had a conversation on my podcast with Michael Meade, looking back
Yes.
many years, from the sort of heyday. And he himself also, he was very wary about anything regarding men being called a movement, because he saw again the sort of danger of what men moving often means there's a war happening, right, or some kind of thing like that. So he looked at that time really from a place of not so much some sort of political ideology, but really a focus on soul work, right? That's really where he sort of said that was really the heart of it, and continues to be in many ways. But this practice of using or inviting in story, right, and unpacking story and refracting story through one's own personal experience. A lot of the case then, of course, was around masculinity and femininity and the culture, but now it's begun to be expanded and into much broader themes, right? And really the way we use it in the school, I'll just say this, is the practice and lens of using story, poetry, and myth to wrangle meaning for oneself and for our collective journey. We have on our site, it's the reawakening of the mythic imagination in modern times.
That makes perfect sense.
Mm.
Yeah.
That
speaks to me.
Well, I'd love to hear too then, I mean, obviously one that's steeped in story as you are as well, that I would consider you're a Jedi within this, without needing that specific term. But what has story been to you in terms of that specific way or lens, to see both one's own journey and the collective journey?
My relationship with story has kind of changed and become more and more elastic over the years. So when I first became a storyteller, storytelling was like a safety net for others, not for me. It was a bit for me, but I was a bit what's the word? Aggressive is too strong. I was, my nickname was the small black cloud. I was I was in defense mode a lot of the time. So when I started storytelling, when I became a storyteller, it was like a healing balm. I've used that term before, but I can't think of it any other way. Stories have become more and more a place for me to explore what it means to be a human being, and also to explore my relationship with the people in the stories and where my own prejudices lie and where my own morality is trying to force itself down the throat of people in the stories that I choose to tell. And then when you look up from the story and start to realize, I look up from the story and start to realize where I'm doing that in my daily life. So it's it's become a bit of a balancing act now. I'm looking at story from the point of view of what is it in there in any story, because the stories are, the way I describe them, are tiny little universes. Everything is perfect within that little world, all the trees, all the flowers, the landscape, the people, the balance of the relationships in the villages, or the towns, or the cities. Everything is there perfectly endowed. And so as a storyteller, my job, I think, is to explore the depths of what it means to be human within that perfect little world, without imposing myself on the story as though I was a god of that little world. So I use stories to culturally stitch myself back together, because when you're born in a country that isn't the country of your parents' birth, you are essentially rootless. So finding these traditional folk tales from West Africa, from the Caribbean, from the Arab countries, because they're the three areas that have been greatly impacted upon by the slave trading of African people as slaves. That's why I focus on those stories, but I also focus on them because it's a way of rerouting myself, rerouting my need to be in defense mode. So it's rerouting it in that sense, and then rerouting as in trying to find new ways to reconnect myself, I suppose. So that's how stories work with me and how I work with story.
Mm, beautiful. Thanks, John. Rerouting. I heard it both too as like rerouting in a way,
Yeah,
like reorienting, and
yeah, that's
both
it.
are true.
Yeah,
And I
exactly.
wonder, yeah, I wonder for the listeners as well, and we're going to be launching into a telling very soon, the Camel Driver, which you could say a bit about in a moment. But
Mm,
how should the listeners or the viewers
yeah.
listen to story? Like, what's the way to approach story as a listener in a way that is able to receive or to be stirred in the best way?
I would say you approach a story the way you approach when you go to someone's house for a meal and you're invited in and you have this sumptuous feast put in front of you. Hopefully, you're not the kind of guest that picks through the food and goes, "Oh, I don't like that." "Oh, I don't." Hopefully you're not that kind of guest. Hopefully, you're the kind of guest who's come to a table, recognize the great effort that your host has made, and that you will sit there with your belly open, all of your nostrils, all your senses ready to receive this sumptuous feast. I would say
Mm,
that's the way to think about it.
mm. I love that. Yeah, sumptuous. I wonder, would you say a little then about this first story uh, before we approach it, or would you like to offer the telling first and then speak a little about the
No, I'm
story?
happy to talk about it. I can talk
Okay,
about it without giving away too many
please.
details, and hopefully not too many of the people listening and watching have been on YouTube and watched me tell it. But this is a story that I first heard. A colleague shared it with me a while back. We were involved in a storytelling project together, and we were considering the different types of stories we would work with. And this story came up, and I fell in love with it immediately, and I've been telling it ever since. And then I found out some time later, because I have this habit of telling stories to every single Uber driver I encounter. I told this story to an Uber driver, and as we pulled up to my front door, he stopped the car, turned the engine off, and said, "That story is a hadith from the Quran." And then he told me the context
Mm,
of the story, which I thought was really beautiful because one of the times that I've told it, I can't remember where I was. There was a young man in the audience who was from Egypt, and I just kind of pointed at him and I said, "Can you sing?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Okay, will you just come and just sing as I tell this story?" So he just improvised with this beautiful,
wow.
Egyptian mellifluous voice as I told this story, which is rather beautiful. I think it's beautiful anyway.
Mm, wow. Maybe that's it too, that there is this mysterious conjuring, right? I find that happens with story and what is drawn out of people that maybe not like it would never have been called forth, right?
Yeah,
Without that contact point or that sense of ancestral calling or connection or whatever it happens to be.
yeah. And I think also the best films are not light films, not Disney light, not that kind of stuff, but the films that really grab you by your heart and make you want to watch it again as soon as you've just watched it. The
Mhm.
really deep films. I think the stories that I choose to tell have that impact on me when I've heard them or when I've read them.
Mm,
That I want to go back and tell them again and again, just as I want to go and watch, the
mhm,
400 Blows by Truffaut again and again,
mhm,
and Moulade by Osman Sembène again and again and again, and or any Hitchcock again and again. You just want to go back because they hit you somewhere.
mm,
They don't just skim the surface of your humanity. So that's another reason why I choose the stories that I choose to tell. And I'm hoping that everyone will enjoy this story.
mm. Beautiful. Well, perhaps without further ado, a reminder though to the viewers, you're welcome to leave your comments or just potent moments of the story or just track it a bit, and then after, I believe we're going to open up some space where we
Yeah.
can bring some of your comments up and we can work with the story afterwards.
Yeah. And then I
Sound
can
good?
tell you a little bit more about one of the people in the story as how it relates to the Quran and the
Mm,
Hadiths, which I don't know anything about, at all. But this cab driver was so enthusiastic about it when he heard it for this reason.
mm,
So I'll tell it to you now.
yeah. Okay. I'll see you on the other side.
See you on the other side. Once upon a time, a camel driver led his camels from his village through another village on his way to Baghdad. As he passed through this other village, he noticed a walled orchard He knew it was a walled orchard because hanging over the wall of the orchard was the branch of a peach tree, and hanging from that branch were 3 fat, juicy, delicious, ripe peaches. So ripe were they that the juice was dripping down onto the ground, and the ants were scurrying from where they lived to drink up that nectar. As the camel driver passed the orchard, he was gripped with a terrible sense of envy. He said, look at that. It's all right for some people. They can make their living staying in one place, where I have to travel here and there, thither and yon with these camels to make my living. I have to leave my family behind. It's just not fair. At the same time, the orchard owner was looking out of the door, the gateway of his orchard, and he'd seen the camel driver approaching. And he too was gripped with a terrible jealousy. He said, look at that. Some people, they have the luxury of being able to travel across this beautiful land, whereas I have to stay here, rooted to the spot like one of my trees. It's not fair. Now, as both men were gripped in their own sense of misery, the lead camel saw the 3 peaches hanging from the branch. And the lead camel stretched up its neck and broke off the branch and began to chew and swallow down those peaches. The orchard owner was so angry when he saw this that he picked up a stone and he launched it in the direction of the camel. He struck the camel in the forehead. The camel fell to the ground dead. The camel driver, seeing his dead camel, and then seeing the orchard owner through the gateway, was gripped with such a rage that he too picked up a stone and he too launched the stone in the direction of the orchard owner. The problem was that the orchard owner didn't move quickly enough out of the way. He did try to move, but the stone struck him here on the temple and he fell dead to the ground. The camel driver couldn't believe what he'd just done. He had no intentions of killing anyone. He looked around to make sure no one had seen what had happened. He took out his knife and he cut the rope that tied the dead camel to the second camel. And then the second camel became the lead camel. And the camel driver tried to lead it away. Hat, hat, he said, hat, hat, let's go. But he had been seen. He'd been seen by the sons of the orchard owner. And they flew out of that gateway and they lay hands upon him. And they said, murderer, you killed our father. And he said, I'm sorry. It wasn't my intention. He killed my camel. Look, he said. He fell to his knees. He said, look, don't hurt me. And he felt inside his robes and he brought out a bag, a leather bag filled with gold. He said, I have blood money to pay for the life of your father. Please don't kill me. They said, blood money? We don't want your blood money. We want your life. We want your blood. A life for a life, a death for a death. Blood for blood. You killed our father. We'll never harvest peaches with him again. We'll never sit in the cafe and drink sweet, hot black coffee with our father again. Because of you, today, we don't want blood money. And then they began to drag him through the streets. Of course, the commotion drew the attention of the people, the neighbors. They said, what's going on? And the 2 sons told them, take him to the judge, said the people. And they began to push and jostle as that poor camel driver was dragged through the streets until they came to the home of the judge. The judge was inside eating a meal, but he was a judge. So he screwed up his napkin and he came outside and he said, what's the matter? And the 2 sons told the judge everything. This man, they said, he killed our father. And they began to recount the story. Wait, said the judge, wait. He turned to the camel driver and he said, well, what do you have to say for yourself? You killed their father. And he said, I didn't mean to kill him. It was an accident. He killed my camel. I have blood money. I can give them blood money. If they will just accept that, I can go about my business. Wait, said the judge. And he turned to the sons of the orchard owner and he said, this man has blood money. He didn't mean to kill your father. It was an accident. Take the blood money. We don't want his blood money, they said. A life for a life, a death for a death, blood for blood. Wait, said the judge, and he turned back to the camel driver and he said, they don't want your blood money. They want your life. And it is their right to ask. Having been offered the blood money, having refused the blood money, they do not want it. I'm sorry. Your life is forfeit. He clicked his fingers and out came the executioner with his sword sharpened to perfection. And he had in his hand, rolled up he had the prayer mat, which he rolled out in front of the camel driver. And he said, my friend, make your peace with our God. It's time to die. Water was brought. He washed his ears, his nose, his mouth. He began the prayer, and then suddenly he stopped. He said, wait, am I not a condemned man? You are, said the judge. Then does not a condemned man have a final request? He does, said the judge. Ask. He said, I want to go home. I want to go home. I will be gone for 3 days and 3 nights, and then I'll return. He wants to go home, said the judge. You can't go home. No, I have a final request. That's it. I'll go home for 3 days and 3 nights. I promise I'll return. I promise, but I have to go. The judge looked at him, and it was his final request. He could not refuse him. He said, very well. You can go if someone will take your place for the 3 days and the 3 nights that you say you will spend away, and then you will come back. Ask. And so the camel driver, he stood before the crowd that had now gathered, and he said, is anyone here willing to take my place for 3 days and 3 nights? I promise I'll return. And the people, they jeered at him and they clapped their hands at him and they booed him. They said, just accept your fate, die. But there was one voice at the back of the crowd. Faint voice said, I'll take his place. And everybody swung round to see this little old man with a grey beard and grey hair, and he was edging his way through the crowd, and the people were trying to stop him. Old man, what are you doing? You don't know him. You don't have to take his place. He said, I'll take his place. And he stood soon before the judge. The judge said, old man, you understand that if this man doesn't come back, your life will be forfeit. I know, said the old man. I'll take his place. Very well, said the judge. And so the camel driver was given one of his camels, and off he sped. The old man was bound and taken down into the dungeons. 1 night passed, 2 nights, 3 nights passed, 4 nights passed. There was still no sign of the camel driver. The judge held out for as long as he could, but justice had to be served. And so the old man was brought up from the dungeons with his hands bound. And the judge said, old man, I'm sorry, you put your trust in the wrong person. The camel driver has not returned, and I'm afraid that your life is now forfeit. He clicked his fingers. The executioner came, and again he had the prayer mat rolled up, which he rolled out in front of the old man. And he gave the old man the same instructions that he gave the camel driver many days before. Water was brought. He washed his ears, his nose, he swilled out his mouth. He began his prayers. And when he finished his prayers, he called out, and then he turned to the executioner and he said, you make this a clean kill. And he bowed his head and he parted the hair from the back of his neck. The executioner rested his sword on the old man's neck. He lifted it once, he rested it again. He lifted it again, he rested it. And when he brought it up for the final blow, a voice said, someone's coming! And everyone swung in the direction of galloping hooves. Someone was coming on the back of a camel, their face covered against the elements and the dust and the dirt of travel. This person galloped through the crowd, jumped down from the camel, took the old man by his elbows and lifted him up. He said, old man, I'm sorry I was delayed. And he pulled back the covering from his face to reveal that it was the camel driver. Nobody could believe it. He came back. He's a fool. I wouldn't have come back. Murmurs began to whisper around the crowd. I'm sorry, said the camel driver. I'm late, but I'm here now. And then he went down onto his knees and he began to wash his nose, his ears and mouth. And the judge said, stop, stop, stop. What's going on here? You, he said to the camel driver, where have you been? And why did you come back? He said, sir, back in my village, an old widow woman had entrusted all her jewels to me. If I had died in this village, having hidden her jewels, they would have said I ran away. They would have said I was a thief. So I had to go back, restore her jewels to her, say farewell to my wife and my son, and then come. My son wouldn't let me go. He pulled on my clothes. He cried in my arms. And so I told him stories and I sang him songs. And when he was asleep, I laid him to bed in his to sleep in his bed, and I hugged my wife, and I jumped on my camel, and I came as quickly as I could. I see. You, old man, said the judge, why did you offer to take his place? He said, I was taught when I was a child that a man's word is his bond. A man's word is everything. He promised to come back. I chose to believe him. If he had not come back, I was ready to die, because I'd rather die than live in a world where a man's word means nothing. Interesting, said the judge. Well, I was taught that without mercy, there can be no true judgment. Without compassion, there can be no true judgment. And so I say to you, and I say to all of you, he said to the crowd, no blood will be spilt today. And then he turned to the two sons of the orchard owner who'd come to witness this execution. He said to them, you will accept blood money for the life of your father, will you not? And they said, yes, we will. We see this is an honorable man, and we will. Good, said the judge. And he took the four men into his house. The gold was weighed on the scales. And when the money was handed over, pomegranate wine was poured for everyone, the old man, the judge, the two sons of the orchard owner, and the camel driver, where they talked about life, they talked about death, and they talked about justice. That, my friends, is the end of that story. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jan. I'm sure everyone at home is clapping alongside as well. I certainly had some images stir for me in the piece. And also, yeah, was there anything specifically you wanted to name before maybe launching into?
Yeah, so when the cab driver outside my house kind of turned off his engine, he wanted to tell me that it was a story it was a hadith from the Quran. And I said, oh, why is it significant? And he said, because the old man in this story, the version that I tell, in the Quran is someone who was a racist. And he called names to the initial muezzin, the person who first called out the prayer from the tower. And that was a black man. And this man had scandalized him and scorned his mother. And that the Prophet, peace be upon him, he had chastised this man really heavily and told him that he had to humble himself. So this man travels through some of the hadiths. So when he offers to take on this burden that is brought by the arrival of the camel driver, that's part of him paying his penance for his racism.
Yeah. Wow, that is, I love the context of that, and as well as this, like a mythology that spans, like multiple stories. Which is such a mythos.
Well, it's that thing, like I said, about elasticity. You think the story is one thing, and then you stretch it out, and it becomes so much more than what it appears to be.
It strikes me too that the this theme of revenge, right? Like revenge killing. This is something that you mentioned our mutual friend Tad, and he's spoken to the story of essentially excavating like how much of an issue that was actually in a lot of these cultures, where when an accident or some violence was committed, there was always the possibility of unleashing this reciprocal violence or a kind of never-ending wave of back and forth, and that there seems like the story is whispering this other possibility too.
I think what's beautiful about it though is there are always options. The option of the blood money, that we don't have that. Do you know what I mean? We don't have that. But you have cultures where there are things built in to address where someone has broken the bounds of what is acceptable within their community. It doesn't always have to be a swift, harsh response. So that I think that's what the blood money represents in this story. But it is the grief of the brothers, because I think it's easy to characterize a specific area in the world as being having a predominance for certain ways of approaching problems. But actually, the reality is grief is at the center of this.
Mm-hmm.
Those two young men's grief for the loss of their dad, the sudden and violent loss of their dad, it wasn't just that he died, meant that they were blind, not able to hear, not able to see. Really, that's not the only way to do things. There is another way to do things. Otherwise, he wouldn't have offered the money, and the judge wouldn't have pursued it as a possible solution to the problem. So I think that when grief really grabs hold of you, sometimes it can stop you dead in your tracks, and your own humanity can get sucked out just by the action of someone leaving your life.
You know, I'm struck too by the power of story in this way of, and the multitude of characters, in that they so rarely divide into, well, in this kind of storytelling, you know, in sort of generally maybe older Disney style, you know, there's always a good and bad side, but true stories, it feels like, that have this multiplicity, right? It's like, who's the bad guy in that story, right? It's like there's grief and there's, you know, there's blame, but there's also accountability. Yeah, it stymies that desire to try to divide up the world so easily.
Yeah. And that's what I mean when I say it's important to me anyway to tell stories that make that happen in the mind of the listener, because it's too easy to say it's this or that. And this or that is usually just based on where we're at this moment. It doesn't mean it's the best solution for the situation. It just means that's how we feel about it in that moment. So those two brothers, that's something else that the taxi driver said to me, is that in the Quran, he said that the two brothers say, never let it be said that we witnessed a brother being honest and true, and we did not acknowledge it. And that's why we'll accept the blood money. Yeah. Which is, again, you see a shift. And the shift is all based on this kind of common belief system, which we very rarely have the luxury of being part of these days. Not one that suits our own lives anyway, let's say.
We have a few comments too, I think, that are also touching on this a bit. There's one from it was a story path, so at least the username, but I'll bring it up here. Okay. So the part where the old man says he'd rather die than live in a world where a man's word is not his bond struck me.
It's like, how many of us really live through, like, right through to the end of that line of integrity? Like, at which point do you stop? You know?
It strikes me too that, you know, the part that got me in relation to that sort of web of consequence was also in the, you know, here's the case where the camel driver, you know, threw the rock accidentally, but still, you know, set the rock in motion. Kills the father, sets in motion these chain of events. He's up for execution, and he says, okay, wait, I got to take care of things, you know, so he does. But when you hear the story of what he did when he was back there, you know, and how he, you know, said bye to his wife and, you know, told his son it wouldn't leave, you know, that's hitting me. I have a young son. I'm just imagining myself right in that moment being like, what the circumstance where I actually have to say, okay, son, I got to go and I'm not coming back because of my word that I gave. And right. So it's this honor versus, or a sense of honor, right, versus actually being a figure in this young person's life. And that, like, paradox is which is right, you know, and that again unleashes a kind of quixotic nature of life, which doesn't divide up so easily in this web of consequence.
Yeah. And I would also say that this whole chain of events started as soon as both of those men began to question the validity of their own lives in comparison to the one they saw before them. As soon as that happened, that's when the chain of events actually started. This sense of, he's got that, I haven't, I want it, it's not fair, is what set off that chain of events. And both of them were involved in that. And actually, the first aggressor was the orchard owner, because an animal eating fruit from a bough should not be such a problem. If the camel driver had gone and plucked them and given them to the camel, then, you know, I would say that the orchard owner had cause for concern, but he didn't do that. It was an animal just doing what animals do. So what prompted the throwing of the missile? What was it? Dissatisfaction with his own life, grief of his own existence, and envy of someone else who he assumed, he projected an assumption. He didn't just project that stone, he projected an assumption that that camel driver's life was everything he wanted it to be, and vice versa. They both did that. And I think that's a very interesting position that you find yourself in as a human being, is when you project onto somebody else what you think is going on, and then you take actions based on what you think is going on, or on your own resentments about what you think is going on. And then it all, you know, that wheel keeps turning and turning and turning, and it has to stop somewhere. And in this case, it stopped with the judge.
I love that aspect. Yeah, that you named the envy and the projection of a sense of, oh, they have it better than me, and perhaps even the unwillingness, or maybe the lack of I don't know, maybe courage to just walk over and say, like, hey, I'm actually really envying your life right now. Tell me about it. And he'd be like, well, I was looking at you and I was actually like, whoa, you thought you had a great life. Like, imagine that was the path forward. And it, you know, seems to whisper it. But then we wouldn't have a story necessarily.
Exactly. So. But it's interesting because, you know, if you were to unpack that moment further, like, that could have been, it might have been, it could have been a friendship based on dissatisfaction. You know, something beautiful could have come out of it if either one of them had been able to stop looking out before looking in.
Yeah. Beautiful. We have a couple other comments here. You know, there's one here with Matthew says, I was touched by the men sharing wine at the end, and I wonder how they leave the gathering, if they stay connected or they go their separate ways.
That's an interesting question. I've never thought about that, actually. I've never thought of it beyond them. If this was a film, then I would kind of the crane would leave them. You know, we'd see them inside drinking the wine, and then we just leave them there. But Matthew's question is an interesting one. I don't know. What does Matthew think?
Yeah, feel free to add a bit more.
Feel free to say how you think the evening would end. I mean, I'm not so sure, because someone's got to go home and tell their wife he's not going to be a dead man, and he's actually coming back, and everything's going to be fine. So, I don't know. It's a very interesting question. I've never thought of it before.
What strikes me too is, again, this sort of life affirming finale, not from a place of it's all better per se, but it's more like the kinship of, wow, life is mysterious and grief soaked, and yet we're still willing to, you know, share wine and you know, come together as the outcome of what could, again, have been a spiraling, you know, reciprocal revenge over and over again, right? And there's kind of like a deep wisdom in that, of course, that, you know, that outcome, no matter, it's not the happiness of the person coming back, but it's not the spiraling consequence of more and more destruction and violence. Yeah.
And also having a wise person in your midst in the form of the judge, you know, is really useful in times like this, you know, to have someone say, wait a minute, we're not going to pursue this now, are we? I mean, this is a good man. It's clearly demonstrate this is a good man. This is a good man. I know you've lost your father and you're sad, but we don't have to do this, do we? And it's it was the willingness to not do it, I think, from the two sons. And at the end of the day, everyone in this story is willing, even if they challenged by the situation, even if they struggled with the outcome, the consequences of their behavior on every level. Every single person was willing and had an open heart. And I think that's another reason why the story could end the way that it did, because the people wanted it to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sort of some kind of base level generosity of, spirit there.
Yeah.
I like this comment from Kay Walker. Helpful says they could have swapped homes for a week. This is the camel driver and the orchard owner.
I guess. Yeah, they could have, I suppose.
They found it put them on home swap or something. But yeah, Jen, I mean, there's some other great comments here. Here's a comment from Dan as well. He says, what are the significance of the man's responsibility to the women's jewel collection in his home village?
I think the significance of it is, again, it's to do with integrity, isn't it? Having been entrusted with something, how it's like I said before about the how long, at what point does your integrity stop? Do you say, okay, I can be integrity and I can have integrity until this point, then it gets very difficult and awkward for me, so I'm going to stop? Is that what you do? Or do you live, do you show up like that all the time? So I think the significance of it is that this man, again, it's this willingness to live according to your heart. He would rather have ridden there, stressed himself out getting there, getting these jewels back to her. He would rather do that than have for 7 generations his family known as thieves. That means something. And I guess when your good name and your reputation means something beyond money, it just means something, that you can live in the world knowing that you do a good thing, you did a good thing, you have a clean heart. It doesn't matter to everybody, but to me, that's what mattered in this story. Without this willingness to live true to his own integrity, that old man would have died, because he didn't have to come back either. But he did come back. I don't know if that helps at all.
Yeah, thanks, John. Maybe last one here for this particular story is just a possible postscript. Is Honey here says, I think they go their separate ways for a time, but the camel driver visits with respect and care packages from time to time when his route takes him through their city again.
Yeah. I think a care package might be a very anachronistic way of looking at it. You know what I mean? I'm not sure if people thought of them as care packages in those days. And the idea that they need a care package as opposed to bringing a gift, is again, I think that might be something that is connected to the region that the story comes from, that we have a narrative going that isn't necessarily fitting.
Thanks. And Matthew just responded actually finally to his what he thought might happen here, and says, my fantasy world would be something of a grief ritual happening at some point. And yes, Jan, practically letting the camel driver's family know he will live. They will be part of the ritual too. Yeah. Maybe so. Beautiful. Well, I understand you might have one more story for us, Jan.
I do. How much time do I have?
We have at least 40 minutes, or up to 40, if we like.
This story is from the same region, and it's from 1001 Nights, and it's, again, I suppose there are echoes, but I'm fascinated by these people in these stories. So I'm going to tell you this story. So once upon a time, Harun al-Rashid, the merciful, who used to go about amongst his people in disguise so he could hear how they felt about living in this kingdom and about him and about how best he could support and help the people, was on his way back from one such journey with his vizier. And as he approached the gates of his palace, there was an old blind beggar. And King Harun al-Rashid, being who he was, he dropped a coin into the beggar's cup. And as soon as he dropped the coin into the beggar's cup, the beggar clasped him round the knees and said, "Oh, beat me, beat me." And Harun al-Rashid said, "No, I'm not going to beat you, old man." He says, "Beat me, Do me harm, I deserve it. No, no, said Harun al-Rashid. And the vizier unwrapped the old man's arms from around Harun al-Rashid's legs, and he went off into the palace gates. And as they walked, Harun al-Rashid turned to his vizier and he said, that man's story, I need to hear it. Why would anyone want to be beaten once they've been given gold? I don't understand. I want you to bring him to the palace tomorrow morning. I must hear his story. And so it was. The very next morning, the old blind beggar was brought before King Harun al-Rashid. And Harun al-Rashid said, old man, tell me your story. What happened? Why did you want me to beat you? It's because I deserve it, said the blind man. I deserve to be beaten. Yes, but why, said Harun al-Rashid. Tell me. If you have ears to hear, said the old man, I will tell you my story. He said, once I was a merchant. I was a merchant and I used to hire out my camels to whoever needed them. I had 100 camels. And one day, a dervish came to see me. And the dervish said that he needed to hire 50 of my camels. And that if I would accompany him on a journey, as payment, I would get all the riches I could ever imagine. Of course, said the blind man to Harun al-Rashid, when I heard this, I'm a man, I'm a merchant, why should I not want that? And so I lent him 50 of my camels, and then I brought 50 of my own, and off we went through the desert. We walked and we walked and we walked, and we were getting further and further away from the village until finally we came to a place where two mountains almost met. And in between those two mountains, he lit a fire. And after he lit the fire, he felt under his clothes and he brought out some leaves and he threw the leaves into the fire, and a great big tower of smoke began to rise up from the fire. And then the smoke began to solidify, said the old man to Harun al-Rashid. The dervish felt under his clothes again and he brought out a key. Because in this solid tower there was a door. He put the key inside the keyhole, he turned it, he pushed it open, and inside I saw such riches. Rubies, sapphires, diamonds, pearls, gold crowns, gold bars, bracelets, anklets, armlets, necklaces, rings, earrings. It was too much. I couldn't believe what I saw. And the dervish turned to me and he said, fill your saddlebags with as much as your camels will carry, because I will do the same. And I didn't hesitate, said the old blind man. He said, I began to run in and out of the tower, stuffing the camel saddlebags with as much as they could carry. And as I went in for my final trip, I noticed that the dervish who'd been doing the same things, filling his saddlebags with all of the treasure, I noticed that he took a small terracotta pot with a cork lid and he hid it under his clothes. He left. He said some words. He outed the fire. The tower disappeared and we made our way back towards the city. And then we came to a certain place. The dervish told me, he said, I'm now going to use all of these riches to help the poor and the sick. Thank you for your service. Thank you for the camels. I will return them to you when I've finished. Thank you. And we both went our separate ways. But, said the blind man to Harun al-Rashid, something didn't sit well with me. A dervish. Why would a dervish need 50 camels laden down with gold and silver and rubies and sapphires? He was a holy man, wasn't he? Surely he didn't need all 50. And so I tethered my 50 and I went after him. And I said, brother. The dervish turned round and he said, yes. And I said to him, brother, do you really need 50? Surely 30 is enough for you. Give me 2 of the camels. And the dervish, who was very, very, very warm-hearted, he said, of course, my brother. And he handed me 2 of the camels and he left with his 30. And I went back to where I tethered my 50. I now had 70. And as I was leading them away, I just wasn't comfortable. I wasn't comfortable with the idea that a holy man should want so much gold. And so I retethered my camels and I went charging after him. And I said, brother, brother, stop, stop, stop. And the dervish turned around and he said, yes. And I said to him, surely you don't need 30 camels. You're a holy man, are you not? Give me one of them. You have 20, I'll have 80. All right, said the dervish, and he untied one of the camels and he gave that camel to me and he went off and I went back to where I tethered my 70. Now I had 80. But why should a dervish need money? Surely prayers are enough. And I went after him again, and this time I insisted that he give me 2 of the camels, the 2 that were left, the 2 that were heavy laden down with all of those jewels. And the dervish, he looked me straight in the eye and he said, you are a mean-spirited man. Look at everything I've given to you. You wouldn't have any of that if it wasn't for me. And yet you want to take it all? Take it all, he said. Take all of it. It doesn't matter. The true riches I have in my coat. Don't worry. And so I went off. And now I had all 100 camels laden down with all of that jewelry, all of that gold, all of that silver. I should have been happy, shouldn't I? Said the old man to Harun al-Rashid. But I remembered the terracotta pot. And I went after him. I said, brother, you're hiding the best of the treasure from me, I believe. And the dervish rounded on me and he said, you really are a mean-spirited man. You have 100 camels laden down with all the treasure you can imagine. And yet still you want this one thing I have. Yes, I do. I said to him, to the old man, to Harun al-Rashid, because I think that that's the best of it. You were too happy to give me those camels. What do you have under your clothes? What is that? And so he took out the small terracotta pot. And he said to me, there's an ointment in this pot that if smeared across one eye, will allow the person upon which the ointment has been smeared to see all the treasure everywhere that it could be in the world. And they can go and find it. Rub it on my eye, I said to him. Of course, because he was sick of me and wanted to be done with me, he put his fingers in the ointment and he smeared the ointment on my right eye. And I could indeed see where all the treasures in the universe were buried. And I would have given every single one of those camels to go and find all of that treasure. And then he said, are you satisfied? And I said, yes, thank you. And as he turned to leave, I said, wait a minute. Why only one eye? Why only my right eye? Why not both my eyes? There's more to see, isn't there? You just don't want me to find it. No, said the dervish. There's no more to see. If your greed will push you to this limit, and I rub this ointment on your left eye, you'll be struck blind. You'll be plunged into darkness. But I didn't believe him, said the blind man to Harun al-Rashid. I didn't believe him. And I would not stop harassing him and berating him until finally he said, very well, meet your fate if that's what you insist upon. And he plunged his fingers into the ointment and he smeared my left eye with the ointment. I was plunged into darkness, said the blind man. I was plunged into darkness and I was left there by the dervish who chastised me. And I could hear him. I could hear him moving towards my 100 camels. And I could hear him untying and leading my 100 camels away. I could hear my treasure slipping away from me. And I called to him and I begged him and I pleaded with him, but he would not listen. He had had enough of me. He would have nothing more to do with me. He left me there on the outskirts of the village, of the city, in the desert, on my own. I was lucky, said the old blind man. I was lucky that a caravan of merchants were coming that way and they took pity on me and they lifted me up and they took me into this city. And they left me at your gates, said the old blind beggar to Harun al-Rashid. And I made a pact with myself. I made a pact that if I survived this terrible situation, I would become a beggar, and that if anyone gave me a coin, I would demand along with that coin a kick or a curse. And that's why I begged you. to hit me, and that's why I wrap my arms around your legs, and I would that you beat me now. And Harun al-Rashid listened to the old man's story. And when he finished listening, he said, "Old man, no one will beat you. You will be welcomed into the arms of me and this whole court. You've suffered enough, old man. It's time. It's time to embrace your new life." And Harun al-Rashid, he sent for the servants, and they came and they took the old blind beggar away, and they bathed him and they oiled his hair and they put him in fresh clothes. And he lived inside the palace, and never again did he have to sit outside and beg, and never again was he rewarded with a kick or a curse. And that is the end of that story. Thank you very much. Thank you. I can't hear you, actually. Are you muted?
How's that? Yeah, thanks, John. It's such a transportation into that world. Like my entire location here disappeared, and I was there with you. And what a story about, about many things, but the greed of sort of the creeping never enoughness of greed, right? It seems to be present deeply in the story, as a sort of almost like a slow motion catastrophe, as he keeps going back for more and goes back for more, and you're just almost like, don't do it, don't. And but even down to, again, the terracotta pot, which is the most probably at least visually, right, non-glittery precious thing, and yet still it's like, it's not enough. I need that too. And
it's
very
also
powerful.
driven also by the fact that it's not just that I need something, I need that thing that you've got. I can't be, we've got exactly the same thing, but I have to have more of what you have. And it's that thing of that need to acquire, regardless of having enough, you still need more, which I think is what we're living through at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm struck as well by, in the story, there is a redemptive finale. You could say that, he's welcomed into the palace, but there's something too about the power of sharing the story itself, which, right, seems to have some kind of redemptive quality. And whether that's, possibly, I'm surmising maybe like in the court, like hearing the story is actually a kind of, it's a balm or a medicine or a cautionary tale for the court itself, right? Or even for him as the head, right, of the regent. So there's something in that of like, there's some kind of redemptive quality in the telling itself, as a response to this encroachment of greed.
And also, I think the fact that Harun al-Rashid is known in these tales, he's known as being a particularly merciful person. And I think that's the theme that runs between both the stories, is that in both stories, people do stupid things, but there is someone there to remind everyone else that this person may have done a stupid thing, but they're still worthy of respect. They're still worthy of love. They're still worthy of being held in that moment of their stupidity. That we can still do that. Or in both cases, the judge and Harun al-Rashid had the capacity to do that. Did they have that capacity because they were in authority? They're in authoritarian positions, or positions of authority, which meant that they had to be more predisposed to their own wisdom, to accessing their own wisdom, to accessing their own compassion. Whereas on a day-to-day basis, how many of us do that? You make the effort to truly access the merciful and compassionate part of ourselves. Or how many of us say, you can have that compassion, but you can't. You chime with me. We share the same point of view, so you can have that compassion. But I'm not going to make effort beyond my comfort zone to share it with others. I remember seeing something I read where somebody was chastising people who use fluoridated toothpaste.
Mm.
Not trying to educate them, but chastising.
Mm.
And it's like, how far does your integrity go? How far does it stretch? How much do you prepare yourself to show up in the world with a truly open heart?
Mm. Mm-hmm. Thanks, Chad. There's a comment here from Story Paths as well, which I'll bring up here.
Okay.
It struck me that the dervish had such a different relationship to the riches, not getting sucked into wanting them for himself, but his wealth to move around to where it's needed.
Mm. Yeah.
You know, I actually looked up dervish too on the side here as you were telling the story as well, and for others too to check it out. Yeah, there's this quality of, it feels almost like in India, right? The sadhus. There's this maybe a similarity of that kind of renunciant. Yeah.
Yeah. And they're to very, very consciously to serve others. You know,
it's almost too that the note of one needs to be, I don't say purified as a kind of elevated spiritual, floor, but more like purified in the sense of less at prey to these forces, right? Or these forces of greed. It's like one has to do all that work to be able to be proper stewards of wealth in that sense, and not be attached, and to allow wealth to flow in the right way in this case. And maybe I hear in the story that to grant such wealth to those that haven't done that work is actually really dangerous, or it sort of seduces that sense of the never enoughness, not as a moral thing, right? But more as a sense of just the relationship between those things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I never thought about it like that. But yeah, you're right. I think if you get too much and you're not prepared for that too muchness, as a human being, you're not prepared. You're not prepared to be really, what's the word I'm looking for?
Generative, maybe?
Well, you're not prepared to lose. The dervish was prepared to lose everything. He was willing. There's that word again. Whereas the merchant was not willing. And I think when those two things meet each other, that's an interesting challenge. It's an interesting space, tension space, because the best stories, I think, are the ones where you meet someone who is unwilling, who is challenged by someone who is so open, so willing. And that openness and that willingness can drive other people in the story insane, because they cannot figure out why you're being good, why you're being kind. Like, why do you make so much effort? It's really important. I shared a document the other day, and I had to redact a lot of things that were in it. And as I was redacting it, I could imagine my son going to me, "What are you doing? What are you doing that for?" And I was having this conversation with him. He wasn't in the room, obviously. But I was having this conversation with him in my head about how I have to show up. This document had people's names on it. Some people wouldn't bother. They'd just share it. But for me, I had to redact everything, because there's honor in that. There's integrity in that. And it's like, how far do you go? It took me ages and it got on my nerves. But, it's like I have to show up that way.
Yeah.
And it's the effort, I think, that was missing in the blind beggar. And initially the two sons of the orchard owner, actually.
The effort. Yeah. A couple comments here too. I'm going to jump to Barbara's here, because she said, to me, the dervish was an alchemist, turning the gold into kindness, and the merchant only saw the material. I think that's a good way of arranging this sort of the hoarding, as a means to further sense sort of artificial security versus, the alchemist that is in service through that riches.
That's lovely. Lovely point.
Yeah. Audrey says, you have suffered enough, really struck me. Yeah, and that's a turning point in the story too. There's this sort of divine grace sort of enters, into the story there through the vizier, I think, right? He says,
the Harun al-Rashid, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Well, what I find interesting also is that you've suffered enough. It's been a theme that's been going around my life recently, with friends, because all of the man's suffering, there's some redemptive aspect in the telling of the story, but imagine how many times he's told himself that story and chastised himself for that story, and doubled down on his own suffering because he's told himself that story again and again and again and again. And how many of us suffer because of some stupidity in our past, and we tell ourselves that story again and again, and it becomes almost calcified, and then it becomes what we think of our personality. You have suffered enough, to me, is a way of saying, okay, like, it's finished. And it's okay for it to be finished. Whereas we live in a time when we have to rehash everything in order to give it some gravitas or meaning, or so that we can be, I don't know, we don't release ourselves enough from our past suffering. We rehash it and rehash it and rehash it. So to me, Harun al-Rashid saying, okay, you've suffered enough, is another way of saying, okay, the past is over. It's over. It's done. This is a new way. Every day is a new day if you want it that way. Or you can suffer again because you can't quite get that bungee rope off your back, and you keep going back into your suffering.
I'm stuck with two things swim up. Is one, the power, and I believe, I can't remember, I read this in some kind of it was like a group process or some trauma healing, that there's something in basically being able to tell our story and have it received without judgment.
Yes.
Right. Like there's something just deeply sort of healing, it seems, right, as a sort of foundational point of human relationality, that it has the power to heal in that. And I think I hear some of that. Whereas, you tell yourself the story, it becomes, again, the same, whipping and shame thing. But the other piece I find interesting is the study of rehashing the past and sort of essentially being unable to allow others to even move past in this climate of cancel culture. Right, where it seems to be like, that seems to be the mode, right, is to actually enforce a very clear binary. It's like, what you did was wrong, whatever that happened to be, and it's like, you're canceled, you're gone, you're erased. Which seems like, again, a very blunt instrument of justice, which doesn't seem to lead, though, to any kind of integrity, let's say, in the community. And of course, there's some amplification through these devices and through social media and things, where it's like you can kind of have that blunt instrument launched. Let's say, now I'm thinking, of course, of the other story too, launched from somewhat of a safety behind, at a distance, whereas maybe much harder to do that kind of, clear judgment in person, perhaps, because there's a human here, and we could maybe hear the stories of each other. And so, yeah, I see that the tendencies there can be very just further the destruction, further this tether to, like, it's never over, right? You just have to keep spinning and spinning out.
Yeah. And if you hadn't mentioned that, if the person who hadn't mentioned that about the suffering, you suffered enough, that I would never have thought about the story or thought about it in that context. But given that it's a theme that's been going round recently around me, it's just it's just amplified even more.
I think it was either John or Dan from the school here has said, in this redemptive act, do we need kindness and blessing of others to be redeemed and released? Like, is that some kind of quality that you find is part of that sort of necessary element, to feel like blessed in a way by that kindness, or by that, you suffered enough, you're good still, or you're still human, you're still, that grace.
Yeah, I think also we have to be able to claim that for ourselves, because not everyone's going to agree with that aspect. And I've just been watching this documentary, actually, called The Motive, which is set in Israel. 1986, a 14-year-old boy massacres his family. We don't know why. We don't know what the motive is. But what was amazing was the response to him. There are some people obviously very angry. You know, you've killed a mother and you've killed your sisters and your father, and that's a huge, big deal. But it was amazing how the community around him and his family didn't want him to suffer more from what he'd done, and how loved he was, even within that terrible tragedy, because everyone was, most people were so willing, you know, as your colleague in the School of Mythopoetics said, you know, there's a community of people who are willing to hold him in that space, not based on what he had done and the terrible thing that he had done, but the quality of his character. They never lost sight of it, which I find fascinating, given what you say about cancel culture. I mean, it was 1986. Would the same be happening today? I don't know. But I'm finding it fascinating as I watch it, and it's episodic, you know, as I watch it, thinking this is incredible that someone could do such a terrible, terrible thing. Yet there are all these people willing, you know, kind of caring for him. You know, there were all these hands kind of reaching out and touching him in the court and wanting him to be okay, despite the fact that he appeared not to have any remorse for what he did. No one knows what his motive was, but that everyone's so moved by who he was as a person anyway. You know, I think, that community, without that, could he have survived? Probably. Because I think you have to sometimes, if your community won't give it to you, you've got to give it to yourself.
You know, it strikes me that it's a question of what is justice and what is integrity, in the sense of one's perception of their own relationality, or like, you know, this idea that I don't exist in a vacuum.
Yes.
And that, you know, I've heard of cultures that are more intact around these things. I'm thinking of a particular interview I did with an Indigenous fellow, and he spoke of in his community. You know, they don't really have a word for sorry, right, in their language. It's like, as in, oh, I did something. You know, he used an example, I think, of you run over someone's dog, right, in the community. You can't just say, oh, sorry about that. There's actually a whole process by which you're invited to actually not do penance or some kind of thing, but actually tending to that consequence. And actually it involves his whole family, or in this case, whoever did it, you know, their whole family to come together and put on this like somewhat intricate gifting ceremony of remorse, and to show actually not saying sorry is not the thing, it's being sorry. You know, deeply
taking responsibility for the situation,
and how it rolls into binds a whole community. It can either rip it apart or bind it together, that by these ruptures. And I guess that's what I also hear in these stories. It speaks to a sense of interrelationality that maybe can get very lost in a culture here where it's very punitive kinds with justice, right? It's like, okay, you do that thing and that you know, yours to pay that debt. So I love how the stories just open up, right, all of these intricate possibilities.
And I think, you know, because, you know, I practice Nichiren Buddhism, and there's a concept called Ichinen Sanzen, 3,000 possibilities in one moment. 3,000. I mean, it's all quantum physics. It's, you know, I'm not really into maths or physics or anything like that, but it is to do with that. But if you consider there's 3,000 possibilities in that moment there, and the one after that, and the one after that, then our kind of very narrow binary approach to life's challenges can kind of stifle you, really stifle you, choke you, you know, because you can only see it's this or it's that. And so if it's choking you as an individual, then that way is also going to choke a community, I think.
Yeah. Well, Jan, I think we're winding to a close of our time. And been so grateful to you and to those of you who've tuned in, who will watch this later. I'd love to, before I kind of do my closing, I'd love to give an opportunity for you to speak about your storytelling community and invite others to join in particular.
So In March 2021, very much inspired by Tad Hargrave's Mighty Network, I started my own Mighty Networks called the Acquia Storytelling Project. And it's an enrichment space for storytellers. It's the platform in which I teach, the platform in which I teach all my storytelling courses. So I have many offers. I think 3 of them are for non-professional, 2 of them are for professional, and then there's a bit in between. So the first offering is the one-day taster. There's one coming up in May. Can't remember off the top of my head. I think it's May 26th or 27th. I can't remember. I think it's 27th. I'll be doing a one-day taster, and that's just for people who are interested in doing my Foundation to Storytelling course. Just give an opportunity to try out some of the things that will happen on the course. The Foundation to Storytelling course started off as being a course about how to become a good storyteller, and has evolved into what are the fundamentals that you need to have as a human being before you can become a great storyteller. Like, how do you show up, and how do your prejudices get in the way of the story, your fears, your doubts, all of these things get in the way of you being able to tell this story. And then it's also about a deep dive into the story, an immersive relationship with the story, so that when you do tell it, eventually you'll be able to tell it well, and you'll be able to tell it from a place of presence in the story. So that's the foundation storytelling course. That's an 8-week course. Then after that, I do my apprenticeship, which isn't fully formed yet, so I'm not going to talk about that. And then after that, it's 5 days, one story. Anyone can come to me with one story. We work on it 90 minutes a day for 5 days. That can be over 5 weeks. That can be over 1 week. And we dig down into that one story you want to tell. After that, it becomes the masterclass, storytelling masterclass, which happens in my beautiful back garden in my tent. Then the next one is the mentorship, which I've just started. So with the mentorship, I mentor storytellers on creating how to put together a perfect evening storytelling. 4 shows are created. And then after working on how those 4 shows would work, I ask the people to choose one of the 4 shows that they've curated, to put it on in a public space, to get it videoed, and then I will watch it and observe it. And then one weekend with Jan, which again I haven't launched yet, but that is when you pay to come and be in my house for the weekend, access to all my books, access to me and my guidance around whatever storytelling show you want to do. I feed you, and you get to sleep in my bed. So it's a proper full-on weekend. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jan.
And the membership, you can become a member. It's a subscription membership. So many things in there.
Yeah, I'd love to. And I think when my space is cleared, I'm absolutely joining as well.
Oh, fantastic. Great.
Particularly the storytelling thread, which is so beautiful and powerful. And thank you for that. And thank you for being a guest here for the School of Mythopoetics opening. Yeah, and a few words now too on the school, of which Jan is a esteemed guest teacher within, alongside many others, really into this inquiry of story alongside mythopoetics. Some of what we've done specifically here, and also lots more to explore there. And so we are launching our sort of grand reopening of the school on June 1st of this year, and we have a number of events. This is number 2 of the 5 events that are coming up. Up next week, we have From Hero to Trickster, which is a talk about this shift of this archetypal, evolution of letting go of the old hero myth and now stepping towards the time of the trickster. And then we have Martin Shaw, another mythologist, storyteller as well, who's going to give us a story and talk about the other world. And then finally, a whole council practice, which is how we integrate the shadow, which is so much of the practice of, how do we put our lives together in the midst of such wild times. So Those of you who want to join there, check out schoolofmythopoetics.com. You can lock in a founding member rate with us. And yeah, what a joy to be here with you, Jan. Such
Thank
pleasure.
you so much.
Yeah. And to so many of you for tuning in. And yeah, may we continue with grace, generosity, and beauty.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming.